Hey guys, we are back updating the Power Kings for Survivor UK following week 4, the final batch of episodes before the merge, and I thought this was pretty good for the most part. We got some interesting dynamics to break down here, but we'll get to all that more in a moment. But there are 13 players to talk about, and as always, in more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 13, we have the first boot from this week, and here we have Jess, and obviously I was wrong about Jess. I had her actually relatively high on my power rankings in previous weeks, even above the likes of Leilani, and obviously for now for Jess to be out of the game is a bit surprising, though not too surprising within the episode itself, where we saw this dynamic breakdown where her and Nathan were working together. They were part of the Calaton core in a lot of ways. It only made sense for the likes of Doug and Pegleg to align with the outsiders and Lawrence and Shai to take her out, as she was weaker in challenges compared to Nathan. So I found that all pretty interesting, and obviously, in terms of her game, it does seem like she wasn't the best player in the world, but was still in a good enough position for a lot of it to where she was technically within the majority alliance here. But obviously she is now out of the game, which is why she's here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have the other boot from this week, and here we have Shai. And I think in terms of the season as a whole, it does make sense for Shai to go here, particularly right before the merge, where obviously he was a pretty notable figure for a lot of it, and it doesn't seem like he really connected well with a lot of the players here. Though obviously we see him and Lawrence working together, they are able to pull in Doug and Pegleg during that first vote to take out Jess. And then obviously we see them only get flipped on again the very next round, which I did find a little confusing on the face of it. Though considering that Shai and Lawrence seem to be a pretty clear duo, and considering that Doug and Pegleg are at least seemingly willing to work alongside the Lanenas, that seems to be their main loyalty, I guess it makes sense why they would want to ensure that there aren't any too powerful forces there. Though at the same time, I mean, Nathan was obviously a much bigger force within the Calaton core there. But obviously, Shai is someone that just didn't really connect well with too much of the cast, which is a bit of a shame, as I was actually very high on him in the preseason. But again, he is out of the game now, which is why he's here at number 12. And with that, there are 11 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. By number 11, the player I believe is the least likely to win from this point on is Lee. And obviously I've been pretty low on Lee up to this point, and I feel like this episode just didn't do him any more favors, where obviously he was shown getting pretty confrontational about Christopher after he decided to reveal his plan of throwing the challenges to protect Doug and Pegleg. And obviously we got that confessional about how the Lanena alliance is falling apart. And again, all of this is pretty bad on its own, and plus I feel like out of all the people there, Lee just seems like the naturally biggest target there, and the one that the other Lanenas will probably be the most fine with letting go at the first opportunity. I don't really feel like the edit's doing Lee any favors here, and plus I feel like from a pure game standpoint, I feel like he's in a pretty bad spot. It wouldn't shock me if he was one of the first to go from Lanena after the merge here, due to him coming off as pretty physical, and due to him just coming off as someone that can be pretty annoying to certain people as well. So again, I'm not feeling that great about Lee at this point, which is why he is here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have someone who I've kind of slid on more as time has gone on, but here we have Leilani. And I don't know, I feel like at this point Leilani is probably not the best player in the world. Again, she had some pretty poor gameplay last week, and plus I feel like her content this week wasn't great either, where she talks about how she thought Shai was the first to go at that first tribal there, talks about how Shai's the ultimate player and that he'll backstab anyone, meaning they have to vote him out, only for him to be the one that gets turned on there. Now, yes, I mean, him and Lawrence turning Doug and Pegleg on Nathan and Jess was kind of seen as treacherous to a degree, though even then it's pretty obvious gameplay, but whatever. And yeah, she does get some content about how she needs to do this for her son, but at the same time, I feel like she is, again, not one of the best players in the world, which is why I have her here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and I feel like these two are kind of similar in that they didn't get too much content here. But number 9, I did decide to go with Hannah. And I feel like the thing about Hannah is I feel like in general, she's probably not in as solid of a spot at this point compared to the next person we talked about within their respective tribe. And I feel like that was a big factor in why I had them below, where obviously they were one of the people to vote alongside Ren at that last tribal. And even beyond that, she doesn't get too much content here, doesn't really get to explain much besides the fact that not all the Lanedas are aligned. And in general, with her not really being propped up as much, I feel like she's one of the less likely people to actually win, which is why she's here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have someone pretty similar, and here we have Matthew. And again, I feel like Matthew's another one that just hasn't gotten that much focus in the edit, aside from him talking about how he's loyal to Calaton, which is at least something. I mean, at least we have some perspective on that. But really, I feel like he's another one, just hasn't gotten as much focus in the edit, and at this point, I don't really see him as a super likely winner, which is why he is here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and really this person is mainly this high due to them getting more content this week, but even then, some of that can be chalked up to circumstance, and here we have Lawrence. And I've obviously Lawrence played a much bigger factor in the actual gameplay this week, where obviously he and Shai were able to pull in Doug and Peglite during that first vote to take out Jess, only for him to later be blindsided when Doug and Peglite flip back to take out Shai, which isn't really explained much on the show, but I at least appreciate Lawrence's willingness to actually try to play the game a bit more. But admittedly, I feel like he's probably going to be in a not great spot moving forward, where he's probably not going to be that well positioned on the Calaton group. And even like if he were to flip to Laneda, which could get the majority after the merge, I don't really see him being well positioned there either, as considering that Doug and Pegleg were not willing to stick by him. I do worry about that to a degree. And even then, I feel like Doug and Pegley probably have their allegiances more with the actual original Lanedas than to him. So I do worry about that as well. But again, he at least got more content this week, which was enough to have him here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have another player that had an interesting week in terms of gameplay, and here we have Nathan. And again, I feel like Nathan's another one who definitely had a somewhat interesting week where obviously he was at the bottom for a lot of the episodes here where he and Jess were initially planning to work together to stick by the original Calaton group, only for the plan to later flip onto him with him getting blindsided here. And then in episode 8, he does get his message from home where he talks about how that message made him emotional for the first time all game. And he does say that he wants to target Shai as revenge for Jess, where he does ultimately get his way here with Doug and Pegley flipping to him to spare him during that round. So, and admittedly, I'm not entirely sure how he was able to get them on board, though obviously he's able to do so, and now he's coming to the merge in a spot where he's going to be reunited with a lot of his closer allies in Tanik and Matthew. Now the question is how big of a target he's going to be coming to that round, where I do worry he could also be like a pretty big target. He seems to be the most blatantly physical person on the Calaton side, so obviously that's a bit of a worry there. And that also mixing his edit not being as solid as the other players we talked about so far. I couldn't really put him too much higher than here, though he is still going to be an interesting spot coming into this merge. But for now, I do have him here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have another pretty interesting figure to get into here. And here we have Pegleg. And I feel like Pegleg is another one whose edit is probably better than his actual gameplay here. Where obviously he and Doug are pretty integral swing votes during the 2 rounds that we've seen this week, where obviously he aligns with Lawrence and Shai, but at the same time he gets confessional about how he doesn't really trust them, but for now they're willing to work with them to keep them safe. And obviously that plays a factor in the second episode, where we see that Pegleg and Doug are relatively safe coming to this vote. They're really the swing votes here, and obviously they decide to flip to the Nathan side in order to take out Shai, which again is a bit of a questionable move considering that Nathan seems to be a more integral figure within the Calaton power structure compared to Shai, and plus Shai is someone that seemed pretty loyal to Pegleg at that point, so I do question that as an actual move. But obviously, I feel like he is someone who is still being said to be a pretty big character across the season based off their edit. Now, again, I still don't think they're going to actually win by the end of it, but I still feel like they're being propped up to a degree, which is why they're here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this is a player that I'm actually a little conflicted by, as on one hand, I could very well see them being booted relatively soon based off their content, but I can also see them being another pretty major character going forward, and here we have Ashley. And I actually thought this was an interesting week for Ashley content wise, where obviously she understands the logic of Christopher wanting to throw the challenge here. But really, I think the bigger thing to talk about is how in episode 8, where she's the one to narrate the argument between Christopher and Lee, where obviously she ends up saying that this could be a turning point and that this could be the end of the Lenina alliance. And I could go either way in terms of that, where obviously it could mean that she could end up being a victim of this whole fallout with the Lanitas fracturing apart, sort of similar to what we saw from Jess in this past episode, where we saw Jess worrying about like her being the target, and sure enough, the vote flips onto her. But I could also see it just her being like another pretty major character across the season, where she's getting more content than other players that are seemingly in the majority right now, people like a Matthew. So I thought that was something worth considering at least. And for now, I will have her a bit higher here, though obviously we could see that change quite a bit in the weeks to come. But for now, I do have her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and it's actually the same top 3 as last week. It's just a matter of ordering them. By number 3, I actually decided to change the order here, but here we have Tanuke. And again, I thought this was an okay episode for Tanuke, nothing too crazy here. Really, her main content is talking about how the Leilani seem to be turning on each other at this point on her side of things. But then we get to episode 8, where again, most of her content comes from the message from home segment, where she talks about how lead with love is something her mom taught her. Again, nothing too spectacular, if you ask me. But again, I feel like this batch of episodes didn't really do much to lower my view of Tanuke too much, outside of her not getting as much content as the other figures, which was enough to drop her here to number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and both these players got quite a bit of content over this past week, and it was just a matter of ordering them once again. By number 2, I did decide to go with this person simply because it was a bit more negative than the number 1 person, and here we have Christopher. And obviously Christopher gets a lot of content here, with him wanting to throw the challenge so that he can take out one of the Calotons on his tribe and to keep Doug and Pegley safe, which is obviously a pretty solid strategy. The problem is that he is pretty bad at throwing the challenge, and through that they end up winning both the immunity challenges there. Obviously, that's not great. He even gets some confessionals talking about how annoyed he is that he was unable to throw the challenge. We even see in episode 8 him explaining his strategy to the other Lanetas on his tribe. And for the most part, they seem pretty receptive, except he ends up getting into an argument with Lee talking about how he did it wrong and that he's better off letting Lee take charge. And obviously, none of that's particularly great. I feel like that really wasn't necessary to showcase here. And I feel like from a pure game standpoint, it could be setting up Lanena coming to the merge pretty fractured, where even though like they technically are coming into this with the numbers advantage, they could just come off as pretty fractured to where Lee and Christopher cannot see eye to eye, and through that the Calotons could get the advantage here. So I do worry about it in that regard, but I still feel like Christopher is probably one of the top contenders in my eyes. He's probably the most likely person to win from Lanena if you ask me, which is why he is here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor UK right now is Doug. And again, I feel like this was mostly a good enough episode for Doug here, where he talks about being in a good position, how he and Pegleg are having to navigate the middle here, and that he plans to keep Jess and Nathan in the dark about their blind side. I do think a bit of a knock is that he does say that he trusts Lawrence and Shai, which calls into question why he later flits on them in the following episode, which is pretty questionable. And obviously, I did already talk about that move with the peg leg here. But I still feel like coming to the merge, like Doug is someone who will probably be like in a solid spot. Where even though the Lanenas could end up losing a number here at the merge, I still expect Doug to be in an okay spot moving forward. He does seem a bit more dynamic of a player compared to Christopher, which is another pro. And at the end of the day, I still feel like he is someone who I have plenty of faith in to win. Really, these top 3 are very much solid in my eyes. And while I'm certainly higher on Doug right now, I could very easily see it changing in the future. But for now, I do feel the highest on Doug, which is why he is here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps out with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the Power Rankings again, so you can stay tuned for that. I'm covering Survivor 45 and The Amazing Race 35, so you can expect weekly Power Rankings of those shows. I'm on Patreon now, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.